You know, usually when we look at a map of the world, there's this expectation of permanence.
Right, like looking at a finished painting.
Exactly. You see the borders, those neat little lines separating countries, and it feels fixed, stable.
We definitely prefer to think of borders as absolute, unmoving realities. I mean, it just makes a highly complex world infinitely easier to categorize.
But then you step into the actual currents of global affairs, and suddenly that map appears to be drawn in wet ink. We're looking at a geopolitical and economic landscape right now that is shifting in real time.
It really is.
So welcome to another deep dive. If you're joining us today, whether you're a UPSC aspirant trying to make sense of a massive syllabus or preparing for a big board meeting, or you're just someone who genuinely wants to understand the mechanics of this chaotic world, you're in the exact right place.
Consider this your ultimate current affairs masterclass. We have a really substantial stack of developments to unpack today.
I really do.
Yeah, we're synthesizing information from high-stakes diplomatic talks, constitutional debates, cutting-edge microbiology, and even the structural economic data.
And the overarching mission today is to take these 16 distinct events and prove to you that they are deeply intertwined. Because whether we're examining international naval choke points, domestic legal loopholes, or like microscopic bacteria, the underlying systems are entirely connected.
So true.
Let's start with the macro-level forces shaping the globe. Specifically, how a high-level diplomatic breakdown in one part of the world poses an immediate threat to the economic lifelines of developing nations, thousands of miles away.
Right, so the focal point here is the recent 21-hour face-to-face negotiation in Islamabad between the United States and Iran.
21 hours. That's intense.
Very. It was a highly significant meeting. The U.S. delegation was led by Vice President J.D. Vance, and the Iranian side was led by Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. But despite the sheer duration of the talks, they collapsed.
Completely fell apart.
Yeah, primarily over the sticking point of Iran's nuclear ambitions.
And the fallout from that collapse was instantaneous. I mean, U.S. President Donald Trump used his Truth Social platform to threaten an immediate naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz.
Which is massive.
Right. For some context for you listening, 20% of the world's oil flows through that specific narrow passage, and Iran's Revolutionary Guards retaliated by vowing to deal severely with any military vessels attempting to pass through.
The broader consequence here is an immediate cascading economic shock. Because when evaluating the fallout of this 39-day war, you have to look beyond the primary actors. You have to observe nations like Nepal.
Wait, Nepal? How do they fit into a U.S.-Iran naval standoff?
Well, Nepal's new foreign minister, Shasir Khanal, recently outlined how severely this geopolitical tension impacts them. Nepal operates largely as a remittance-dependent economy.
Yeah, right.
A massive portion of their GDP is generated by citizens working abroad in West Asia who then, send that money back home.
So it's essentially like a single faulty traffic light shutting down a 500-mile highway. If superpowers squeeze the Strait of Hormuz, countries sitting high up in the Himalayas immediately feel their economic blood pressure drop.
That is the exact mechanism of the threat. Foreign Minister Khanal expressed profound relief that a mass exodus of Nepali workers hasn't materialized yet.
Because if it did...
Right. If those workers were forced to flee back to Nepal due to a wider regional conflict, the inflow of foreign currency would halt. The domestic economic foundation would fracture almost overnight.
Wow. And that fragility in West Asia sends strategic ripples everywhere, including India's immediate neighborhood. Because while global attention is fixed on the Persian Gulf, another superpower is quietly utilizing both cartography and diplomacy to expand its footprint.
You're talking about China?
Yeah, we're seeing some intense strategic moves by China. They just announced the creation of a brand new county named Senling in the Xinjiang province. And looking at the coordinates, it's placed right near Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, or POK, and the Wakhan corridor in Afghanistan.
The underlying strategy here is multi-layered. Obviously, India has wholly rejected this move, officially categorizing it as a fictitious renaming drive of territory.
Right, they don't recognize it at all.
Exactly. But China's action is not simply about drawing new lines on a map for domestic consumption. It operates as a calculated attempt to secure their restive Xinjiang province from groups like the East Turkestan Islamic Movement.
Okay, so it's a security buffer?
Yes. And simultaneously, it serves to put an administrative buffer around the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which, India strongly opposes because the infrastructure passes directly through POCO.
It seems like a slow, methodical accumulation of leverage. And while they redraw maps in the north, they're rolling out the red carpet in the east. The newly elected Bangladesh Nationalist Party government is sending a massive 20-member delegation to Beijing.
Yeah, and there are two distinct drivers behind this Bangladesh-China outreach that you should really monitor.
That's the first one.
First is a sudden surge in medical tourism from Bangladesh to the Chinese city of Kunming. Due to lingering complex visa issues between India and Bangladesh, China is actively stepping in to fill that healthcare void.
Well, that's smart on their part.
And second, and vastly more strategic, is China's deep financial involvement in the Tista River Comprehensive Management Project,
Which sits perilously close to India's strategic Siliguri corridor, often called the chicken's neck.
Exactly.
That is a massive vulnerability. So if we look back at the renaming of territories, is China essentially laying a permanent legal foundation for future territorial claims? Are they just preparing for court?
Well, historically, China uses cartography as a precursor to legal claims. By officially naming a place and drawing it into their domestic administrative framework, they establish a paper trail.
Right.
So decades later, during boundary disputes, they present those administrative records as proof of historical sovereignty. It transforms a geographical fiction into a legal argument.
That's fascinating and terrifying. But, if external borders are shifting that dramatically, it forces us to look at how internal borders are holding up. The mechanics of India's democracy are undergoing a massive transformation right now.
You're talking about the electoral rolls.
Yeah, let's look at the sheer scale of the current electorate shift. Based on the data from the Special Intensive Revision of Electoral Rolls, the numbers are just staggering. Uttar Pradesh just deleted 2.04 crore voters.
2 crore, wow.
West Bengal deleted over 83 lakh voters. And the Andaman and Nicobar Islands saw an unprecedented 16.6% of their entire voter base removed.
I mean, those deletions are officially categorized under deceased, duplicate, or permanently migrated voters. However, the raw volume changes the political arithmetic on the ground instantly.
It has to.
Yeah, if you live in Uttar Pradesh or West Bengal, the fundamental math of your local constituency might have just shifted overnight.
And that shift in the current electorate is happening at the exact same time as a massive debate over the future of the electorate, specifically regarding the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam, the Women's Reservation Act. The Prime Minister is pushing heavily for this to be implemented for the 2029 Lok Sabha and Assembly elections.
The complication arises because the implementation of this quota is constitutionally tied to the next census and the subsequent delimitation process.
Right, and delimitation is essentially the redrawing of constituency boundaries and the reallocation of parliamentary seats based on new population data.
Exactly. And the opposition, including leaders like Sonia Gandhi and Mallikarjun Kharge, they've stated they fully support the women's quota itself, but they vehemently oppose linking it to the delayed 2027 census and delimitation.
Because of the population control issue, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their core argument is about population control. They argue that delimitation, if based purely on the newest population numbers, would severely penalize southern states that actually followed government policies and successfully stabilized their population growth.
While rewarding the states that didn't.
Precisely. States that failed to control their population would gain massive political power. And they're also advocating for a parallel quota for other backward classes within the women's reservation.
So it creates a profound constitutional dilemma regarding equitable representation. You're trying to increase inclusivity through the women's quota, but the mechanism to enact it threatens to alter the balance of power between the northern and southern states.
It's incredibly delicate.
It's like everyone agrees to add a new rule to a complex board game to include more players, but nobody trusts the way the board itself is about to be entirely repainted.
That's a great way to put it.
And this debate over political representation naturally leads us to the reality of economic representation. Because even when a state's political boundaries are undisputed, its internal wealth can be shockingly segregated. Let's look at Karnataka.
Right, the Govinda Rao report.
Yeah, a new report by economist M. Govinda Rao reveals that out of the state's 236 taluks, 177 are officially classified as backward.
The regional disparity there is just severe. I mean, Bengaluru urban boasts a per capita income of over 8.5 lakh rupees. But when you look at the Kalyana Karnataka region in the north, the per capita income sits around 1.89 lakh rupees.
That is a massive drop.
It is. And this is despite the fact that Kalyana Karnataka has special constitutional status under Article 371J, which was specifically designed to promote equitable development and secure local reservations in education and jobs.
See, the most alarming part of that report for me is that The government has spent over 35,000 crore rupees on infrastructure in these backward regions over the last 2 decades, and yet the wealth gap is actually widening. If pouring 35,000 crore rupees into an area doesn't fix it, doesn't that fundamentally disprove the trickle-down economic theory?
Well, it highlights a profound administrative failure rather than just an economic one. You see, capital concentration is gravitational.
Money attracts more money.
Exactly, and industrial hubs attract talent. The report points out that the allocated funds were spent without prioritizing projects that have a high social rate of return. There are massive inefficiencies in how the regional development boards function.
So the money just bleeds out.
Right. Without structural interventions that build localized capacity, like specialized education and locally sustained industry, the wealth generated or injected into the north simply flows right back to the metropolis of Bengaluru.
So a failure to build localized systems leaves people economically unprotected. Which brings us to how our legal and medical systems attempt to protect human life itself, and how rigid architectures within those systems can sometimes force tragic outcomes.
We have to examine the Sathankulam case in Tamil Nadu here.
Yeah. This case presents a chilling example of a legal bind.
It really does. A trial judge was faced with a case involving severe police brutality. The judge felt that the standard life sentence, which in practical administrative terms often involves remission and results in the convict serving roughly 14 years in prison, was simply too lenient for the severity of the crime.
And remission is just the reduction of a sentence based on good behavior or administrative policy.
Yeah.
Right. So you'd assume the judge could just mandate a longer sentence, like 30 years.
The trial judge cannot do that. Due to a Supreme Court judgment known as the Sriharan case, trial courts are stripped of the power to impose a fixed-term sentence without remission.
Wait, really? Only higher courts can do that.
Exactly. Only the high courts and the Supreme Court possess the authority to say a convict must serve a specific extended number of years without the possibility of early release.
So the trial judge is entirely boxed in by the legal architecture.
Yeah.
Faced with choosing between 14 years, which he viewed as a mockery of justice for this specific brutality, or the gallows, he chose the death penalty.
Yeah. The system removed his ability to calibrate justice, essentially forcing a harsher punishment because there was no middle ground available at his level.
It is a stark example of how procedural rigidity dictates life and death. Now, contrast that rigid timeline in the courtroom with what's happening on the roads in Telangana. They've just unveiled a proactive trauma care policy where they're actively trying to engineer a way out of a rigid timeline.
Right. They're focusing on the golden hour, that critical 60-minute window following a traumatic injury where medical intervention has the highest probability of saving a life.
And currently, emergency response times in the state hover around 13 to 15 minutes, right?
Yeah, and Telangana is aiming to slash that to under 8 or 9 minutes.
The drop from 15 minutes to 8 minutes is massive.
Yeah.
You can't just tell ambulance drivers to press the accelerator harder. Are they utilizing predictive data to pre-position these units?
That's part of it, but the core mechanism is moving away from fragmented care. They are implementing a strict 4-level trauma care network. Level 4 focuses entirely on pre-hospital care, integrating advanced life support ambulances and mobile units directly on high-risk transport corridors.
But they're treating them on the way.
Yes. And Level 3 involves upgrading district hospitals for immediate advanced stabilization before a patient is ever moved to a major city hospital. They are re-engineering the entire physical network purely for speed and clinical efficiency.
In the courtroom, the system struggles to value a life accurately because it's trapped by a rigid procedural timeline. On the highway, the system is frantically trying to escape the timeline of the golden hour to preserve a life.
It's a stark contrast.
And from those acute visible traumas, we really must look at the chronic invisible threats infiltrating our bodies and ecosystems. In regions like Faridabad and Punjab, specifically along the Ganga River, there is a localized health nightmare unfolding.
The water contamination issue.
Yeah. Contaminated water is allegedly driving a massive surge in cancer cases. Families are losing multiple relatives and are being forced to sell their generational agricultural land simply to afford medical treatment.
It's a devastating intersection of unchecked environmental degradation and public health. And while that represents an invisible threat at the macro-environmental level, we're seeing equally alarming threats at the microscopic level.
Right, the Antimicrobial Resistance study.
Exactly. Researchers at UT Southwestern Medical Center recently made a staggering discovery. Doctors have documented for years that men tend to get more skin infections than women, but the mechanism was a mystery.
Until now.
Until now. They discovered it comes down to a biological process called quorum sensing. Bacteria, specifically Staphylococcus aureus, do not simply attack the moment they colonize human skin. They wait. They multiply. And they actively monitor the host's hormonal environment.
Wait, they are eavesdropping on our biology.
Precisely. They detect androgens, specifically testosterone, which is highly prevalent in the sebaceous glands of male skin. The bacteria use the presence of this hormone as a chemical signal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it tells them exactly when their colony has reached sufficient density to launch a coordinated, successful infection.
If bacteria are utilizing quorum sensing to time their attacks by reading our hormones, could medical science theoretically hack that same communication channel? Like, could we introduce a synthetic compound that sends a false signal telling the bacteria they don't have the numbers yet, instead of relying on traditional antibiotics that just try to carpet bomb everything?
That is the exact frontier of antimicrobial research right now. Traditional antibiotics kill the bacteria, which inevitably triggers an evolutionary arms race, forcing them to mutate and become resistant.
Right, the superbugs.
Exactly. By targeting the quorum sensing mechanism, scientists are exploring how to suppress their virulence. If you scramble their communication network, you keep them in a harmless, dormant state without triggering that resistant mutation.
It is tragically ironic that while bacteria are highly attuned to their environment, actively sensing when to strike, we humans often ignore the environmental signals around us, which is why scientists rely heavily on sentinel species.
A sentinel species basically acts as a biological early warning system. Take the emperor penguin, which was recently declared an endangered species by the IUCN. Because they live long lives and occupy very fixed, harsh territories, their bodies act as passive sponges for environmental toxins and climate shifts.
So when the sea ice diminishes or microplastics infiltrate the food web, their health declines first.
Yes, they amplify the effects of environmental change, making the invisible, slow-moving damage visible to researchers before it hits human populations.
And this passive biological absorption by penguins stands in stark contrast to how human enterprise actively engineers new environments. If you look at the entire spectrum of the Indian economy right now, the contrasts are jarring. On the extreme end of modern infrastructure, the Union government is pushing forward with a 92,000 crore rupee Great Nicobar Island project.
Which is a massive undertaking.
It is. The objective is to build a massive international container transshipment port and boost the island's population from under 10,000 today to over 3.36 lakh by 2055. It's a colossal gamble for strategic maritime dominance in the Indian Ocean, but the ecological cost is raising massive red flags, particularly regarding the potential devastation of pristine rainforests and the threat to isolated indigenous groups like the Shampan tribe.
And you contrast that hyper-modern centralized infrastructure push with the reality of traditional labor-intensive economies. In southern Tamil Nadu, particularly in hubs like Virunagar, the safety match industry is currently celebrating its centenary.
And despite 100 years of technological advancement across the globe, this industry survives precisely because it remains decentralized.
Right. It relies on a vast network of smaller feeder units. One facility makes the splints, another digs the chemical heads, another handles packaging. It employs lakhs of workers, primarily women, making it highly vulnerable to sudden shifts in raw material costs or supply chain disruptions.
Then, operating somewhere between traditional labor and modern infrastructure, you have the inland fisheries sector. They are actively boosting national production without building massive concrete ports, by adopting cage culture technology in existing reservoirs.
Which is really clever.
What does cage culture actually entail? Is it just sectioning off parts of a lake?
Essentially, yes. It involves suspending enclosed nets or cages within existing larger bodies of water, like reservoirs or rivers. It allows fish farmers to cultivate high densities of fish in a controlled environment while utilizing the natural water flow for oxygenation and waste removal.
Oh, that makes sense.
It maximizes yield while theoretically minimizing the footprint compared to digging entirely new aquaculture ponds.
And finally, jumping from physical nets and reservoirs to the absolute bleeding edge of digital finance. The banking world is heavily gearing up for deposit tokens. But how do these actually differ from me just using a standard banking app or a digital wallet to send money?
It all comes down to the underlying infrastructure. When you use a regular digital wallet, you're just sending a message to a bank to update a centralized ledger. It can be slow, especially across borders, requiring multiple intermediary banks.
Right.
Deposit tokens are different. They are programmable money issued by regulated commercial banks on blockchain networks.
So they operate like a cryptocurrency, but with the backing of an actual bank.
Precisely. They offer the speed and cryptographic security of a blockchain, but without the wild volatility of unregulated crypto. Because they're programmable via smart contracts, a deposit token can instantly settle a massive cross-border corporate transaction the second specific conditions are met.
Completely bypassing traditional correspondent banking delays.
Exactly. They represent the secure evolution of bank money, poised to handle the next $1 trillion in global trade.
We are watching the economy operate across totally different centuries at the exact same time. You have the manual, decentralized matchstick factories of Tamil Nadu operating much as they did decades ago. You have the staggering ecological and engineering gamble in Great Nicobar. And all the way at the other end, you have futuristic deposit tokens reshaping the fundamental mechanics of how money settles across borders.
It just proves that an economy is never a single, uniform monolith. It's an overlapping tapestry of traditional human survival, vast strategic ambition, and rapid technological innovation.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, from the geopolitical chokehold of the Strait of Hormuz and China's strategic cartography, to constitutional debates over delimitation, the tragedy of the Sathankulam sentencing, and all the way down to bacteria eavesdropping on human hormones.
We really did connect the dots.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Our goal is always to make sure you walk away with the noise filtered out and the critical dots connected.
Before we conclude, I want to leave you with one final connection to consider. Think back to the quorum sensing we discussed in bacteria, how they wait silently, monitoring the environment, multiplying, until they reach the exact critical mass required to launch a devastating coordinated attack.
Right.
Now, look at our global geopolitics. Consider the military buildups, the methodical redrawing of maps, and the posturing around vital choke points. If the microscopic world is warning us about the inherent dangers of a system reaching critical mass, what is humanity's quorum sensing telling us about our own global stability right now?
That is a brilliant, unsettling thought. Because whether you're examining a map of a microscopic cell or a geopolitical map of the world, those borders are never quite as stable as the paint makes them appear. Keep questioning the systems operating around you, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.